Hello, and welcome to Hopeful Conversations, brought to you by Robbie's Hope Foundation. I am your host, Kari Eckert. Joining me today is Karen Malka of Pacer Center. Karen is a parent advocate coordinator at Pacer Center, which has the mission to improve educational opportunities and enhance the quality of life for children and young adults with disabilities and their families. One of the focuses of Pacer Center is parent training and advocacy, and that is why I invited Karen to join us here today. Karen, thank you for joining us and welcome to Hopeful Conversations.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
So, I have the goal of today's conversation for our listeners to learn more about bullying and the impacts of bullying on mental health. Can you fill us in on your role at Pacer Center and how you serve as a parent advocate and the EBD coordinator, emotional behavioral disorders?
Sure. So my role at Pacer, I am a parent advocate and I also coordinate our mental health program here. And our focus is so we get many calls from parents. We are an organization that are parents helping parents. Our services are free of charge to families, and all of us who help parents advocate have some lived experience and have children with disabilities, whether they be learning disabilities, physical disabilities, mental health disabilities. My two children fall under the category of mental health needs as well as some learning disabilities. And we have found over the years that more and more calls that we get have mental health needs in nature, and it's definitely increased. We saw a huge uptick over during COVID. I started here at Pacer right after COVID, kind of at the end of it, so I've been here about 4 years. Um, I'd say a lot of the calls that I have are related to kiddos who are struggling with their mental health, having behaviors at school, whether that be outward behavior, school avoidance. Their mental health may be impacting, their ability to be successful at school. Some students, mental health diagnoses, autism. A lot of the calls that we get, for example, my student is refusing to go to school and now we're facing truancy. My student is being bullied at school and is afraid to go to school. I would, parents looking to get an evaluation for their student because they just know something's off and the school's saying, refusing that. So my role is to help parents know what their rights are. We're not attorneys, so we don't, give legal advice, but we have an understanding of special education laws and what their rights are. We help them navigate that process as they're going through getting services for their student at school. The mental health project, we also will get calls for parents who are seeking other types of services. I want to get county case management for my kid. How do I do that? I think my kid needs more intensive mental health supports. How do I do that? So we don't provide direct service. So we're not therapists. We don't do that, and we don't recommend specific programs, but we can give a parent a list of available resources in their area. We also sometimes get those calls. My child attempted suicide last night. We're at the hospital. How do I let the school know? What do I do? So, it really kind of runs the gamut. And also have some calls, students with dyslexia who are super anxious because they can't read. So we're finding that really mental health is weaved into so much. And also, what I've found really rewarding working here in this role also is that I know what it's like to be a parent of a student with mental health challenges, especially with I had both. I had one daughter who was very internalized things and was pretty quiet in school, and then I had the other one that was very external and had a lot of meltdowns and behaviors. And I understand what that stigma is like. I understand feeling um, that I think mental health is the only area where parenting comes into question.
Oh,
Um, you know,
yeah.
like, oh, well, my kid would never do that, or why, you know. So I think it's really rewarding for me when I can be on the phone with a parent and just say, you know, I want you to know where you're standing. I've stood. And that just feels really powerful because that helped me when I found those people. And I found in my journey with my own kids, I was always very open about it. I know some people tend to be isolated or not talk about it, but I felt that when I was open about it, other people came out of the woodwork. And so I started to
Yeah,
find my people. And I think
sure.
mental health is one of those things that people are afraid to talk about. I think it's gotten somewhat better. Um, but I think being able to field these phone calls and talk with these families, it just makes it okay to not be okay, and just
Mm.
reassure them that it's not your parenting. It's you know, it's it's like any other disability, and so that's really rewarding for me.
It's very complex.
Yes,
And for
it is.
some reason, parenting is just like this real, I mean, is parenting one of the toughest and most rewarding jobs there possibly is? But for some reason, when it's dark or scary, we
Yeah,
just keep that to ourselves versus reaching out. And like every family has something to deal with at some point.
absolutely. And you know, an example is I remember when my daughter was young and we were having just a lot of struggles and meltdowns at home and things going on. And I remember, you know, my husband would start closing the windows, you know, when she was,
Oh,
you know, or I was, and I finally felt like, you know what, I can't just hide anymore. I felt like I was living a double life. I'd have my life at home and then I'd have my life when I'd go to work, and I would be masking all day as if everything's fine, but it's really not. And so I can understand how getting through a school day is really hard for a kid. You know, me as an adult, it was difficult. But I just decided that I was going to talk to my neighbors, the ones who I was close with, you know, obviously, and just said, I need you to know, if you hear these screams coming from my home, you know, we're not abusive. We're not, this is what my daughter's dealing with. And um, people just came out of the woodwork. I had my neighbor across the street said, "Oh my gosh, my husband's sister has bipolar disorder. If you ever want to talk." Another one said, "My father died by suicide when I was 12 years old. If you ever want to talk." And people and things that I lived near these people for years and never knew about
and
this. So,
you didn't
but when
know.
I opened that door to talk about it, it just kind of reduced that stigma, and it just made things easier for me
Well,
too, because I didn't feel like I had to hide. The other hard part with the mental health too is just that it's so invisible, that invisible disability. And um, I remember my daughter also, she was pretty insightful, and we were at Costco just shopping one day, and we were sitting having some pizza in the cafe there, and a group of uh, people came in with some teenagers, and they had visibly, you know, like a Down syndrome, or just you could tell that they have a disability. And my daughter looked at me and she said, "Mom, why wasn't I born with a real disorder?" And I said, "Well, what do you mean?" And she said, "If any one of those kids would fall to the ground right now and start screaming, everyone would forgive them. But because I look normal, everyone thinks I'm just a bad kid." And so we deal a lot, you know, with the families that I talk to, just those feelings of trying to explain to schools, you know, this isn't all willful, you know, what my student is doing, or, you know, there's really a disability here, you know, especially with the anxiety and things like that. Sometimes schools are, it's getting better, but sometimes it's just, well, they just need to get to school. You know, they just need to get to school. And parents, yeah, and they don't realize how hard a parent is working to get their kid to school. And a lot of times, you know, there's that parent blame. There's, well, why can't they just do it? You know, why can't they just get here? And it's so hard.
hmm.
And I remember I had somebody tell me once, well, maybe you should just have her shower in the morning before you take her to school, and then she'll have a better school day, if she's fresh,
Whoa, what was
showered.
that for?
I know.
Fresh.
Sometimes you get like crazy advice. And I remember thinking to myself, well, I can't have her get up and shower in the morning because there's days that I put her to bed with her clothes on for the next day because it's so hard to get her dressed and ready to school. So I think people just
Mm.
don't understand like what we deal with, and it can be so isolating, and so it can be really lonely, I think, for the kids and for parents. So I'm so appreciative of you and things, platforms like this where people are talking about it, and it's better.
Mm.
Yeah, sorry,
Your
that was a
daughter's
long
wisdom as a teenager, the invisible, that's really
answer.
powerful.
Yeah, yeah,
To
it's really,
just kind of let that sit and think about it a little bit. It's so mental illness, like it's so, yes, it's just
yeah.
extremely. Hmm. Oh, goodness. So there's lots of information on Pacer's website.
Hmm.
It's www.pacer.org.
Yes.
And you have a whole page dedicated to mental health and supporting children with mental health needs. What's your favorite resource for a parent that's maybe just exploring? Are most parents who get to Pacer, is it preventative or is it reactive? Like, where should
Both.
parents be? Yeah.
Yeah, I'd say it's both. Sometimes parents will hear about us from another parent. Sometimes parents will hear about us from a counselor, a therapist, a doctor. It just kind of depends. Sometimes from schools as well. Um, it's interesting because we have some of our advocates here. I've had a few who've shared, gosh, once I started working here, I just kicked myself that I didn't call when I was raising my kids. So some people don't know about us. So they kind of find us in different ways. It just kind of depends. Sometimes it's preventative. I'll get those calls. Oh, my student was just diagnosed with autism, and I want to know what maybe services I can access through school, or what I should ask for now that I know that this is what we're dealing with. I also get the calls. The school is wanting to do this with my student, and I don't agree. What should I do? So it kind of depends. We
Lots
get
of different ways.
mhm, lots of different ways. Yeah.
I also found on your website some things of potentially to look for that could show your child is struggling.
Mhm.
Parents were usually the ones that recognize things first, and sometimes that can be hard. And we're busy and everything, but potentially a change might be really, really subtle. Something as a change in sleep, a
Mhm.
loss of appetite, changes in social behavior, lack of social behavior, and we don't feel good about yourself and you're struggling, potentially you can just withdraw because that's a safer space to be in.
Yeah.
Maybe the inability to complete tasks on time. You talked about school avoidance. And of course, there's more obvious changes, but what would your advice be to a parent with when they start to see something to not to react but not overreact? It's a tough line to walk.
Yeah, I often tell parents just, talk to your kid. And I think depending on the age also, I
Mhm.
think the young ones, sometimes it's hard for them, like they know something's going on, but it's hard for them to articulate what they're going through.
Verbalize it, sure.
We have a lot of parents, and I even remember my dad talking to me when I was little. How was your day? Fine. What'd you do? Nothing. So, sometimes I coach parents to try and ask questions in a different way. So, for example, rather than how was your day? What did you do? What's something that made you smile at school today? What's
Mhm.
something that didn't feel good at school today? If you could change one thing about your day, what would it be? Who did you sit by at lunch today? What's something you noticed that surprised you? So asking questions in a little bit of a different way sometimes can help parents bring out what's going on. I also would say, reach out to the school and ask the teacher if they're noticing any differences in behavior, or just personality differences or those kind of things. So keep that communication open and maintain kind of a team approach. Um, yeah, and we always also I recommend parents too to look for patterns of behavior. So sometimes, for example, especially kids at school who have that anxiety or will have outward behaviors, when is it happening? Is it always happening right after lunch and recess? Is it happening in a certain class? Is it more during math class or reading class? Is it happening during a time where they're always with a particular student, another student? Is there friendship issues? Are there academic issues? Are they just overstimulated? A lot of times kiddos who struggle with um, social skills and sensory needs, going to lunch and recess can be the most overstimulating social time, and that could be really hard. And so we talk about what can we add in to make that more manageable for them. Maybe they need a time to just go and decompress for 5 minutes after recess before they go back to class. Some kids, passing time, are they getting teased during
Mm.
passing time? Are they having a hard time walking through a herd of students? Maybe they need to leave class a couple minutes early and then get to their class, and they don't have to deal with that passing time. So it's really trying to find patterns, and I'm really about finding the why. Not just
Mm.
what's happening, but let's try and dig in and find the why. The other piece is, schools will talk a lot about, when things are happening, but I also recommend looking, when is it not happening?
Ah.
Because sometimes that can help us. Okay, well, why is it not happening in this class? Does
Mm.
this, does, what, does the student have a really good relationship with this teacher?
What's
Is,
different? And
is
let's
this
build on
subject
that.
yeah, is this subject matter, um, you know, easier? Is it a preferred subject? Is this particular other student not in that class who may be bullying them in other classes? So,
Mm.
so looking at that, kind of coming at it through all angles can be really helpful. Not just looking, you know, when do they misbehave, but when do they not? And I also talk about a lot in meetings with schools that we need to focus on the disability, not focus on the behavior. The behavior is a symptom of something else. um, the behavior is not the problem itself. It's problematic for the school. I get that, but it's a symptom of something else. And so we need to focus on the disability and not just the behaviors. Because I have a lot of meetings with families and schools about that.
Is that usually a school's reaction? Is like I was
Yeah,
reading about.
well, they keep eloping from class, or this is going on, or they're throwing something, or for example, I was in a meeting once. To just try and figure out what's going on with the student. Well, he threw his chair, and he did that on purpose, or it was willful. And I'm like, well, no. Really, what he was trying to do was reduce his anxiety, but because he doesn't have the skills to do that, that's why he picked up the chair. So how can we help the student build on those skills and develop other replacement behaviors for
Mhm.
what's going on? The other thing is, sometimes schools, I find, are can be reactive. Okay, when the student is dysregulated, we're going to do this. Well, what about trying to help them not become dysregulated? So, what are some of the signs? I mean, I know with my daughter, when she was young, she would start pacing or kind of wringing her hands like this. And I'd say, if you see her doing that, she's becoming dysregulated. So it's really tuning into um, trying to find those things ahead of time. Um, Kind of
Do
like
you
you
feel
said,
like that's getting better overall, like in schools or
yeah, it
educators?
depends.
And
it depends on the team, it depends on the school, it depends on the situation. It also depends sometimes on location. We are statewide, so we support the whole state of Minnesota. And sometimes, you'll have schools that are way out in more rural areas that just have fewer resources, or
Resources, sure.
they may not have a school social worker, or they may not have a school counselor or somebody on site to advocate who has that understanding of those things. So it really just depends. And I was a teacher also for 26 years, so I understand the other side as well. Teachers
Yeah, we
are,
ask a ton of our teachers so
we are.
much.
And I remember there's days I felt that I was an educator, a nurse, a parent sometimes, a therapist, like everything. And it's a lot. I think more and more is being put on teachers. I think
Yeah.
schools are exhausted, teachers are tired, there's a lot of burnout, there's a lot of just the climate, in our country. Um, I think the increase of, and the fear of school violence, school shootings, those types of things. So, um, yeah, so it's a lot. I mean, schools are
It
going
is a
through a
lot.
lot too. But how do
It's a
we,
lot.
I think what I would like to see is just more transparency, rather than getting into that power struggle. Let's just state the facts. Like, you know, we're things are hard. Things are hard right now, and let's just work together and try and get through it together. And rather than who's right or who's wrong, how do we come
Placing
together
blame.
as a team to, yeah. So I think it's I think it's hard for people to be vulnerable with each other right now, and just really um, focus on let's just get together and help this student. Um,
You
yeah.
mentioned Minnesota. That's my home and my heart, as is education. And it's actually how I learned about Pacer as a child, watching a neighbor, a woman who was almost a mother to me as well, who I admired. And she was advocating for her son, who I would like, probably autistic, and she was trying to put him into mainstream education. We went to a really, really good school district in Minneapolis. Um, I imagine these services are available, you're statewide, but in
Mhm.
other states, because our
Yeah.
listeners are everywhere. Like, the bottom line is advocate for your child and find that team approach, find resources, be
Yes.
proactive.
Absolutely. And as you say that, every state has what's called a PTI, and it's a parent training and information center. So,
Okay.
which is equivalent to like a pacer. So sometimes
Thank you.
we do get calls that are from out of state, and then we will let them know. The contact information for their PTI for their state. Sometimes it's by region. It just kind of depends. But
Sure.
Pacer definitely has a really good reputation out there, and we're really strong. And kind of, I believe that we were one of the first in the nation, and our previous director, Paula Goldberg, was instrumental in helping set up other PTIs throughout the whole country. So we really are the trailblazers of this, which is
It's
fun.
awesome. And I
Yeah.
just think that to not, I love, that you're not doing this alone. Like, and
Mhm.
that's one of our messaging at Robbie's Hope is it's okay to not be okay. Like, none of us are perfect, even
Right.
in our role of our journey of parenting,
Hmm. Yeah,
where
for sure.
that comes from. Um, I want to talk a tiny bit more about bullying because I feel like it's just, is bullying. I read some statistics and I pulled them from stopbullying.gov.
Hmm.
And like statistically, it shows that bullying is potentially going down. Like, it looks like it's measured every 10 years. But bullying affects a lot of people. It says that bullying affects all youth because it affects youth who are being bullied, those who are bullying, and those are witnessing bullying.
Absolutely.
Um,
Yeah.
and I remember growing up, like, my mom was an educator, and then my dad's response, like, um, some of the things we heard of being kids in the 80s who are now, or 90s, now parenting teenagers. Um, what's the approach now? Like, say your child comes home, they're being bullied. What would maybe a piece of advice you would give?
Yeah. So again, finding out some more information. Who is bullying you? What is the basis of the bullying? Like what's going on? Like we know now there's some of the older kids. There's cyberbullying that's happening.
Mhm.
There's you know. Physical bullying, being pushed, being punched, being kicked or tripped. There's the teasing bullying. So I think finding out exactly what's happening, who's doing it, and then again finding that team approach and working with the school. Um, some things we talk about a lot is um, especially kids, most of our kids that we work with, our families, their students are on an IEP. So we also talk about there's ways to build into the IEP to help a student address the bullying, how to give them. Do we need to work on self advocacy skills so they can learn how to advocate for themselves? Sometimes we develop a plan. When this is happening, this is where you can go. This is who you can talk to. This is your point person. Um, Also just so that they know what to do if this is happening to them, and then on the school end, increasing supervision if something's happening at recess, having a para out there, just observing and seeing what's happening. If the student is struggling and needs more outside help or therapy to deal with that as well. um, Depending on the situation as well, sometimes we recommend parents going to the higher ups, reach out to the special education director, reach out to the superintendent. We always tell parents to put bullying or any kind of teasing incident in writing and submit that to the school. And we also have a template that parents can use for notifying the school about bullying. That way it's documented, and later on it can't be, well, we didn't know about it, or we were never told. So we often tell parents, we have a saying at Pacer: if it's not in writing, it doesn't exist. So really documenting it, and then following up. If the school has made a commitment to, yes, we're going to observe these students, we're going to make sure they're not in the same class, just following up and making sure that's actually happening and that there's follow through. Sometimes kids who really aren't feeling safe at school, sometimes a school will implement like a buddy system. If they have to go to the bathroom, then a buddy will go with, or an adult will go with, or so it just really depends on the situation. But I think the main thing is don't suffer in silence. Reach out to somebody, let somebody know, um, and then, like I said, document things also.
Are schools, is it an assumption that I might make? Is there like bullying prevention programs that most schools are introducing to kids, maybe, I don't know, early elementary school? Or is this something that overall is not being addressed? Because I guess I also found the statistic that when upstanders or bystanders
Mhm.
intervene, bullying stops 57% of the time.
Yeah, yeah. Definitely, I know I can speak to Minnesota, but over the last several years or many years, most schools are implementing social emotional learning. So they have
Mm-hmm.
programs about social emotional, those types of things. The state of Minnesota also, they have a anti-bullying law, and they require every school in the state to have a policy of how they deal with bullying.
Okay.
That's the other thing. I always tell parents, ask your school, ask your district or your school for a copy, a written copy of their bullying policy, to make sure that they're following what they're supposed to be following. And if you see something in there that hasn't been done, then that you have that power to say, this is your document, this is your policy, and this has not happened to support my child. So looking into those things.
Minnesota was always a leader. Sadly, in the state of Colorado, our social emotional learning, our budgets are really
Yeah.
K through 12 education is really underfunded, and
Yeah.
school districts are starting, they were ramping SEL education back up, but now it's on the block to be cut, unfortunately,
Yeah.
which is really
Yeah.
unfortunate as an advocate in the mental health
Yes.
space.
Yes. I'm trying to think what else. But yeah, but those are some of the things that we talk about, to try and help intervene. Um, but finding the what, the why, the who. Um, yeah.
I like how you just talk about like how you ask your child questions like after
Mhm.
school, not how was your day, but more not a leading question, staying curious with your child.
Right. Yeah.
It's
And
very,
I think also for students with disabilities, when making sure that they understand the questions, not necessarily when they're talking to parents, but I've been in a meeting before where the school will turn to the student and ask a question and the student will answer. And then I said to the student, "Did you understand the question?" No. So sometimes, I would say if your student is being accused of something or involved in something, maybe having the parent there while they're being interviewed by the school, um, just to be
when
able
you're
to.
scared, yeah, when you don't know the situation, how you're supposed to.
Right.
Oh, there's a
Right.
lot to unpack there.
Yep.
Well, this has been a super helpful conversation. I think I just from your website, from Pacer's website, you can do this. You are not alone. Connect with other parents, get support, find groups online, find groups on social media, as well as through children's mental health organizations. You are the expert on your child.
Yes. Yeah.
Really, really beautiful.
Yeah. Yeah. We also at Pacer, in addition to receiving phone calls and helping parents navigate, we also have many, many workshops that are free of charge. And, anybody from, I mean, we've even had someone from Australia attend one. So, yeah, so people find workshops on all different subject matter. I mean, on special education, on dealing with challenging behaviors. We have one on, I did one last month on school avoidance. And I think we had like over 300 parents that signed up for that. So they're kind of we kind of do them in a webinar type format and then do a question and answer afterwards. So those are really helpful. We also have, I think you can get to it through our website, but I think we have a YouTube channel with lots of short videos also. So there's like a ton of information
Educate yourself as a parent, take the opportunities
yeah.
that are out there.
And we also do a lot on parent leadership training to train parents as advocates and leaders. And that's really, what we focus on too, is to not do the work for the parent, but to be there alongside them as we empower them to learn how to advocate for their child. And, sometimes parents don't realize how important their voice is. And I know that it's easier sometimes to just say, well, can you just do it for me? Or can I've had parents who will say, well, when we're in this meeting, can you just talk for me? And I'll say, I will talk with you. We will talk together, but I don't want to take your power away from you. You are the parent, you are the person who spends the most time with your student, in all areas of their life, whether it be sports, home, school. You know them best, so your voice is important. And then I'll jump in as needed. But
Right.
and then I always check in with a parent prior to a meeting so we can prepare and come up with talking points. But it can be really, I get excited when I can just see a parent just evolving as an advocate for their student. And
Empowering. Like it's
yes.
beautiful for the relationship with the child, too, the
Yeah.
parent child relationship.
Yes.
Thank you for your time. Before I let you go, this can apply to Karen's thoughts today, Pacer, whatever you'd like. I end every podcast with the same question, and it is, what does the world need to hear right now?
Wow, the world needs to hear right now. I think in a time where people are less and less connected, to just find ways to stay connected. I think with technology, with AI, with, I think just really seeing your neighbors, seeing your people, and just that human connection, I think, is so important. And as our lives get busier and more stressful and more technology coming in, but not to lose sight of that need and the power of really just having that human connection. Um, I think that we're all in need of that right now. And everyone needs to give themselves grace. I think it's people are doing the best they can right now, and it's not easy. And I think yeah, people are we tend to be hard on ourselves. So, and we need to. I always say not every day is good, but there's something good in every day. So trying to just remember that. And so
Awesome.
yeah,
Karen, thank you for your time. I really appreciate it,
you.
for joining us today on Hopeful Conversation. To our listeners, be sure to tune into our next episode. And until then, remember, hold on, pain ends. Thank you, Karen.
Thank you.